感谢主，我们晚上继续跟大家分享以色列为他众子的祝福的预言。
And for tonight, we continue our sharing on the topic of Israel's prophecies concerning his sons.
在他祝福他的众子的时候，圣经是用以色列，而不是用雅各。
And in the blessings towards his sons, the Bible recorded the name of Israel giving these prophecies instead of Jacob.
这也表示他这个时候他的信心、他的灵性已经很成熟。
So by using the name Israel's, this means it demonstrates that he has now matured in his faith.
也从神那边来得到这种灵感然后看到他的小孩子的未来。
And by receiving these inspiration from God, he was also able to foresee the future of his children.
这个是类似像先知的这种角色。
And he plays a role that is similar to the prophets.
那在这个12个儿子当中，他分成3组。
And so among the 12 sons, it can be divided into 3 groups.
一组就是这个利亚所生的这6个儿子。
And one group are the sons that was given birth by Leah.
那我们上个星期已经讲过了。
And we have already covered these sons last week.
那第2个部分是毗拉跟这个西帕所生的小孩。
The second group of son are the sons born of the maids Bilhah and Zilpah.
那就是但然后加德啦，以及我待会要讲的亚瑟，还有这个拿弗他利。
And this second group of son includes Dan and Gad, and also includes the 2 that we will cover later on, Naphtali and Asher.
那第3组呢，就是这个拉结所生的这2位小孩。
And the third group then is the son born of Rachel.
那礼拜1的时候，我们已经讲到那个但。
And on Monday, we already covered Dan.
他原本他的父亲对他是寄以厚望。
Who in the beginning, his father had high hopes for him.
但是很可惜他并没有按照他的名字这个审判的这样子的他并没有达到这种审判者的这种特质。
However, sadly, he did not achieve live his life up to his name with the meaning of playing a role of judge.
意思是说，他一个做审判官的，他必须要公正必须要行得好。
And as a judge, you are meant to be upright and doing good deeds.
但是雅各后来预言他的这小孩却是像蛇，却是像毒蛇毁。
However, Jacob's prophecy regarding this son is that he will eventually be like a viper or like a serpent.
接下来我们昨天也谈到星期一也谈到这个加德。
And Monday night we also covered Gad.
那加德最尤其是摩西他同样也有祝福，他对加勒祝福是非常正面的。
And for Gad in particular, in relation to the blessings which Moses has given to this tribe, was a positive one.
雅各是说他被敌人追赶，但是他必反败为胜就是反败为胜这样子。
And for Jacob's prophecy for Gad was that he will be chased after by his enemies, but he will triumph at last.
但是但这个摩西祝福更是根据他们这个支派的行动所给予的很正面的祝福。
However, in Moses' case, the blessing that he gave was a very positive and reassuring one in terms of relating to their whole tribe.
没有错，他们是主动说他们要约旦河东的地。
And yes, they were very proactive in terms of possessing the land that is east of Jordan.
他们也愿意付出，就是这些勇士这些年轻的这些勇士过河跟他的兄弟打仗。
And they were also very willing to volunteer their mighty warriors to cross the river and to fight together with the rest of their brothers.
说圣经说他实行神的公义，
And so the Bible records that they execute God's judgment
然后跟神施行神跟以色列所立的典章，
and also executes the ordinances of God.
那后来他都仗打完了，他就回到自己的地方，
And after they have finished their battles, then they return to their allocated land.
是保持自己有很强的战力，
And they kept and they strengthened their territory.
那昨天我们在讲说，十字架的道路可能也就是要舍己啊。
And we mentioned on Monday night that the way of the cross requires us to forsake ourselves.
就是说有时候我们必须要先deny yourself 啊，先把自己先放下，先拒绝自己的想法、自己的感觉，
And at times we in our life of faith we need to deny ourselves and to deny ourselves of our own personal thoughts and viewpoints on things.
好，那为了就是要跟随主耶稣，
For the purpose of following the way of the Lord.
那将来我们得救，我们也才有资格向世人夸胜了，
So that in the future, when we will receive our salvation, then we will be able to declare our triumphs to the rest of the world.
天国路都这么好走的话，那其实对世人也不公平了，
If the way up to the heavenly kingdom is a very easy path, then it's also not very fair to the rest of the world.
像你现在看到很多那些成功的故事，
It is just like when we read a lot of success stories these days.
你可能会羡慕他们的成就，
Perhaps we'll be envious of their achievements.
他们也花了很多的付出很多的代价，然后也牺牲很多，那时候你只是羡慕，你不会去嫉妒他，
But we also need to realize that behind all these achievements, there is also a lot of sacrifices and a lot of hard work.
但是有些人假设都没有付出什么代价，就可以得到他们所要的，那时候就心里就很不舒服，
So in contrast, if we see someone having a very great achievement, but without all those sacrifices that they have given beforehand, then we might think that it's not quite right for them to have this success.
所以大卫还说，你不要为恶人心怀不平，才会这样讲嘛。
But David encourages us that we should not fret that we see how those who are evil being prosper.
我要讲就是说，有时候我们跑天国路要付出一些代价，很辛苦，这个是必然的，也是值得的。
So my point is that when we are walking on the way of the cross, it is inevitable and quite natural that we need to have some sacrifices in our life.
好，那我们现在再看回来这个创世纪的第49章
Now we come back to Genesis 49,
20节。
verse 20. Genesis 49, verse 20. Verse 20. Bread from Asher shall be rich, and he shall yield royal dainties.
亚瑟是利亚的使女希帕的第二个儿子。
Asher is the second son born of Leah's maid Zilpah.
这个名字很好，他的名字就是这个祝福哈，就是幸福祝福的意思哈。
And his name is very meaningful and has the meaning of blessed.
那确实啊，因为这个时候的利亚，你会发现他已经不会把他的情绪放在跟他妹妹这个怎么相争的这个情绪当中啊。
And so at this point in time, when Asher was born, we find that Leah was no longer getting entangled with her emotions and being competitive with Rachel.
当他生第四个儿子就是犹大的时候，他那时候已经会就是赞美神，那个时候他的信心其实是蛮成熟的哈。
Because by the time she gave birth to a fourth son, which is Judah, and gave him the name that has the meaning of praise, we can see that Leah has reached a certain maturity in her faith.
所以他以为他到第四个儿子的时候，那时候他以为他的生育停了哈。
And by the time she had her fourth son, she thought that she would no longer bear any more children.
他就说把他的使女给他先生，然后希望他的先生能够多生小孩，然后壮大自己的实力。
And this is why she gave her maidservant to her husband, so that through her maidservant, she would be able to have more children through her.
那跟他的妹妹的情况就不太一样。
And her situation and her mindset is a little bit different from her younger sister.
他的拉结就一直想要相争，然后想要伸冤，这是这个心态就有差距了。
And we can see how in Rachel's case, she was still very competitive in her nature, and through the name that she gave to her children, for example, to take revenge. So this reflects her mindset at the time.
我个人也觉得说，这个父母的性格会影响到自己小孩。
My personal view is also that a parent's personality or nature can also influence our children.
那时候，父母是心存感谢的，他就会在小孩身上也表达这样子的情绪跟想法。
And when parents are filled with gratitude and thankfulness, then this would reflect in their communication towards their child.
那如果不是的话，也会影响到小孩。
The same applies as well if it's the opposite.
雅各对亚瑟的祝福就是说他的地是很肥美的粮食。
And the blessing that Jacob gave to Asher is let his bread from Asher shall be rich.
对，等于是说，也确实他是刚好在以色列的西北角，最西北地方。
And so Asher's allocated land is in the northwest part of Israel.
等于是他是临着这个地中海，然后北边就是临着这个推罗跟西顿。
So it's it's along the Mediterranean Sea, and the northern part of their allocated land is the region of Tyre and Sidon.
我去以色列的时候，很可惜并没有到那个地方去。
So in my trip to Israel, unfortunately, I wasn't able to go to that area.
但是那个地方我看有些影片，还有一些相片，那边真的很漂亮。
But I saw the scenes or pictures taken in that region, and it's very beautiful.
那边也是接近他们耶斯列平原，所以说那个地方也是生产粮食的地方。
And it's very close to the plain of Jezreel, and that is the place where they would plant a lot of their fresh produce.
说这个雅各就祝福他说，他那个地可以出君王的美味了。
And so Jacob's blessing for Asher was that from his land will yield royal dainties.
所以的君王美味就是说，第一个他的品质一定要很好嘛，献给君王的品质要很好。
So for food that is reserved for the royal family, firstly, the quality must be very good.
第二，当然他有愿意献的这种心嘛。
And secondly, the produce that is offered needs to be offered voluntarily.
你看，讲腓立比书的第1章。
If we turn to Philippians chapter 1.
腓立比书的第1章。
Philippians chapter 1.
第11节。
Verse 11. Philippians chapter 1, verse 11. Being filled with the fruits of righteousness, which are by Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God.
圣经有讲说我们要结出这个果子，这里说这个公义的果子。
And here it teaches us that we need to bear fruits of righteousness.
因为这种公义的果子，目的就是要献给神，所以神就来赞美神，然后献给神，把荣耀归给神。
So the fruit of righteousness is to be offered to God, to bring glory and praise to God.
这就是我们讲说就像过去这个亚瑟他所生产的粮食，然后来供奉这些君王一样。
So it's just like how it's being described of Asher, where the produce of his land would be given to the royal family.
我常常在想说，什么叫做公义的果子，一直在思考。
And I often wonder what it means to bear the fruits of righteousness.
公义的意思是说，你做神所要你做的事情。
And the first meaning of bearing the fruit of righteousness is that we are doing something which God wants us to do.
有时候这种只是开始只是一个像一个种子、一个想法跟一个意念而已啊。
So this might start with an idea or thought in our mind.
然后这时候你把它种在土里，看它开始发芽，代表说你已经有这样的行动跟这样的行为了。
And when this idea or thought is implanted and then it starts to grow, which means that from an idea, then it develops to have actions.
你看到一棵树的整个从它播种发芽，一般我们的把这棵树的结果都放在这个最后它能不能结出那个果子来。
So if we look at the growth of a plant, from the planting, the sowing, the sprouting, the growing, and the bearing of fruits, the bearing of fruits is at the end stage.
所以当讲说我们的结出公义的果子，意思是说这个公义的性质已经成为我的个性之一了。
Therefore, when we say bearing the fruits of righteousness, it means that the righteousness is already part of our character.
我们的不管我们的想法、情绪，我们的决定，都会向着这个公义的方向去行哈。
So that whether it be our thought process, our decisions, our emotions, they would all be aligned with God's righteousness.
这个时候你就在神眼中就所谓的公义的果子，公义的人了，这样。
And therefore, in the eyes of God, then that we are one who bears the fruit of righteousness.
你做一个动作、两个动作，还不能成为公义的人哈。
So being called a righteous one is not merely based on one or two actions that we have done.
持续做，除了做到最后，就是你已经不管想法跟你的意图、跟你的动作、跟情绪，都成为公义者。
But it's the accumulation and the continuous actions throughout our life, so that in the end, no matter what we think, what we do or say, and our decisions that we make, they all can be summarized that we are a righteous one.
好，那我们来看一下这个摩西对亚瑟的祝福哈。
Now we look at Moses' blessing for Asher.
看一下这个生命记。
Let's turn to Deuteronomy.
13章。
Chapter 3.
24到25节。
Deuteronomy chapter 3, verse 24 to 25.
33章。
Apologies. Deuteronomy chapter 33.
对
，verse 24 to 25. Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 24 to 25. And of Asher he said, Asher is most blessed of sons. Let him be favored by his brothers, and let him dip his foot in oil. 25. Your sandals shall be iron and bronze. As your days, so shall your strength be.
当然 NKJV 是翻成 sandal 哈。
So in the NKJV version, verse 25, it renders or translated as sandals.
因为这个字哈，坦白说就出现一次哈。
But the original text for this word only appeared once in the Bible.
那其他的，譬如说 ESV 啦、中文啦哈，都翻成所谓的门栓啦，门栓。
So in other translation of the Bible, for example, the ESV or the Chinese translation, translated this word as bolts.
那我们看起来哈，这个门栓会比较正确啊，看起来哈。
So if we look at these verses contextually, then translating it to bolt would be more accurate.
但是如果你翻成 sandal， 其实也是可以解释，等一下我再解释哈。
However, if it was translated as sandals, there's also a possible way of explaining this verse, which I will elaborate later.
我们先用这个门栓的概念来说哈。
So let's look at it from the perspective of a door bolt.
你知道这个整个门当中这个城门当中，最关键的就是那个门栓呐。
Or the bolt of the gates, which is in the city, the gate bolt is the most critical thing in the city.
以前他们住在城里面，就是需要有一个城墙来保护他们嘛，哈。
So in the past, when they were living in the city, the people were protected by the city walls.
白天呢，他们城门是打开的，
During the day, the city gate would be open.
但是你不是这个城里面的人，譬如说你要继续做生意，或是你要办公，他会把你名字登记下来。
And if you were not citizens of this city and you need to go into this city during the day, then you need to register your name at the city gate.
当然，如果你是居民就进去了哈。
Of course, you don't need to do this if you are already normally living in the city.
然后太阳下山以前，他们要关城门之前，他们就要点名，哎，这些刚刚在名字上面的人离开了这个城没有？
And in the evening, before the city gate were to close, then they would go through the list of name that was registered to make sure that these people have already left the city by then.
如果没有的话，他们就要进去抓了。
And if those people haven't left by then they need to follow up and go and arrest them.
所以你还可以理解说，为什么拉合他要救那两个探子，就是因为就是因为他们这样发现的，哎，怎么这两个还没有出来就要抓他们这样？
And therefore we can understand the situation for Rahab, why she had to.
铁的代表说他的防卫能力就很强了。
And for the city gate, if it was made of iron and bronze, it means that it would be a very good defense.
那会这样讲，就是因为我们讲过这个亚瑟刚好是这个以色列的西北方嘛，哈。
And it is described this way because, as mentioned just now, the land of Asher is at the northwest.
它等于是跟邻间这个腓尼基王朝，比如说推罗跟西顿，就是跟外族连接在一起的。
So it borders other countries like Phoenicians or the Tyre and Sidon.
好，那如果这个边界如果不强的话，那就很危险啊，人家就很容易打进来了，对，好。
And since they are the bordering land, they need to have a very good defense of their boundaries.
所以他就说啊，这个亚瑟呢，他有这个多子的这个福气哈。
And here Asher is blessed with a lot of sons.
然后呢，他有弟兄的喜悦，代表他的人际关系很好哈。
And he is favored by his brothers, meaning that he has a very good relationship with others.
然后第三个说脚沾在油中哈，表示他的物产丰富哈。
And then it says, let him dip his foot in oil, meaning that he is very wealthy materially.
啊，这个油可能是橄榄油，也有可能是动物的油哈。
And this oil, it's possible that it's olive oil or animal oils.
一般来讲，应该是指那个橄榄油会比较，因为动物的话会用 fat， 比较不会用不会用油这个字哈。
So generally it's interpreted as olive oil because if it's referring to animal oils, it would use fats instead.
那代表说它反正就是代表它物产丰富到哇，那个油呢都可以这个脚都沾到那个油，代表说哇很丰富就对了哈。
And therefore it describes how Asher is so materially abundant that they have so much access that even they can dip their feet in oil.
神有时候给一个人很大的祝福哈。
So at times God may bless someone abundantly.
不是说要这个人享受在世上的这个舒服日子，应该不只是这样子啦哈。
But I don't think the purpose is merely for this person to enjoy these blessings in this world.
经有说嘛，你如果多给就是要多要嘛哈，神就是你要多付出，这个是很合理的嘛哈。
And the Bible also teaches us that the more that you're given, the more will be asked of you.
那像亚瑟就是一个很好的例子，因为他多得到祝福哈。
And therefore Asher is a very good example because he was blessed abundantly.
因为在那个时候小孩子多是一种福气哈。
And during those time, it is a very blessed thing to have a lot of children.
人际关系也很好，代表说哇，他在他周边的这些兄弟跟邻国的关系都不错哈。
And he has very good interpersonal relationship with among his brothers as well as with his neighbors.
那我们在想说，我们用现在的角度看，如果一个人他家庭美满，然后呢人际关系又很好又很有钱，哇，那我们就知道这个是人生的胜利组嘛哈。
And so if we look at it from today's perspective, if there was someone, they have a very happy family life and they're also very wealthy, very successful, and have very good relationship with others, then we would say that they are very successful in their life.
所以难怪这个摩西说你的门栓是铜的铁的。
And so this is why Moses would describe him as his bolts, gate bolts would be made of iron and bronze.
但是呢，摩西所说的铜的铁的，不是指，当然不只是指上面这三样东西。
And of course, when Moses described this as iron and bronze, he's not only referring to all his physical achievements.
更要讲说你的日子如何，你的力量也是如何。
But more importantly is the next phrase, which says, "As your days, so shall your strength be."
就是说你这个人要产生你的力量，是跟你的日常生活有关系的。
That is to say that for a person to gain strength in their life, this has a lot to do with their daily living.
那这个 strength 这个字刚好希伯来文也只有出现一次。
And the word strength in verse 25, the original text in Hebrew, this word only appears in the Bible once.
我在查这个字的时候，我们发现中文跟 NKJV 和 ESV 用的都是用在亚兰文的圣经。
So while I was studying the meaning of this word, I find that in the NKJV, ESV, as well as the Chinese translation, was using the Aramean edition of the Bible.
那他们就那个什么塔棍那个这个圣经的译本，就是用这个 strength 这个字
So from the translation comes to the Aramean version of the Bible, which renders it as the word strength.
那这个有一本这个希伯来圣经很有名的希伯来圣经对不起，希伯来的圣经字典他就把这个字翻译成解释成所谓的休憩啦，就是 leisurely work 休憩这样。
And if we refer to a very popular Hebrew Bible dictionary, the way it explains this word is that it explains it as a leisurely work.
对，所以那个 NAS 就是美国标准版新美国版本，它就翻成 NAS 它就翻成 So will your leisurely work be 就说你的休憩正如你的日子这样。
And therefore, the NAS version of the Bible translate this verse as your days, so shall your leisurely work be.
那我在想坦白讲，你也没有办法讲说谁对谁错了。
So in this situation, it's a bit difficult to determine which translation is right or wrong.
要是有出现一次的时候，你没有办法对照其他的经文要怎么出现，其他的就没办法用其他经文去对照。
Because this particular word in the original text only appeared once, and therefore it is difficult to have a comparison with other verses and how this word is used.
但是我个人认为说，其实这两个也没有冲突啦。
But my view is that both translation of this word, there is no contradiction.
你的力量正如你的日子，这个我们很能够理解，就是你的力量是根据你每天所行这个的习惯所发出的嘛
So if this word was translated as your day, so shall your strength be, that's also quite straightforward to understand, meaning that our strength in our life comes from how we live our day-to-day living.
另外一个想法就是说，你要怎么看出这个人的日子怎么样？看他休息，看他的时候，他的生命是如何。
And if we translate this as your day, so shall your leisurely work be, we can also understand this as to determine the strength of someone's life, you need to look at how they live their life when they are at a leisurely pace.
我们用城的概念来说
So if we try to explain this from the concept of a city,
你要如何知道这个城的防卫强不强？其实是在晚上的时候。
how do you measure the defensive strength of a city? You need to measure it and look at it, how it defends itself at nighttime.
因为大家睡觉了，然后城门关起来，那个门栓卡住了，那个时候才确定说这个城市是不是安全的
When all the residents of the city are all asleep, the city gate is closed and then is locked with a bolt, and that is the time where the city is safe or not.
白天可能还看不出来，晚上的时候就更清楚了哈。
And you perhaps cannot see how strong is the city's defense during the day, but then it is very obvious during the night.
那对一个人来讲，你要怎么看出这个人的生命力，也是看他晚上的时候。
And therefore, similarly, when you're trying to assess someone's life and look at the strength of their life, then you need to look at them what they do in the evening at nighttime.
所以晚上是指的，比如说罪恶的势力临到了哈。
And especially at nighttime, when it's very likely that the forces of evil would be very influential.
或者说你面对患难的时候，
Or perhaps the time when you need to face with difficulties and afflictions.
人生非常低潮、非常沮丧的时候，
At the lowest point in your life.
这个我就把它称作所谓的黑暗了。
That is the time of the period of darkness in our lives.
这个人信心是不是刚强，就是看这个时候他能不能面对这个晚上，面对他的人生的黑暗。
And therefore, a measure of a person's strength of their faith is how well are they able to face the period of darkness in their life.
我们看一下这个诗篇的第4篇。
Let's refer to Psalms chapter 4.
第4篇的第4节。
Psalms chapter 4 verse 4. Chapter 4 verse 4. Be angry and do not sin. Meditate within your heart on your bed and be still.
晚上这个睡觉的时候，其实也是人生最脆弱的时候。
And at night, when we are about to go to sleep on our bed, that is the time where we are most vulnerable.
你想想看，如果说一个人他烦恼心事重重的时候，你看晚上就翻来翻去，就睡不好，对不对？
And you can imagine someone who has a lot on their mind or a lot of worries in their life, they will be tossing and turning in their bed, unable to sleep.
犯罪是在晚上的时候。
And it's also very common for someone to commit sin at nighttime.
人家在统计最容易自杀的时候，也是深夜的时候。
There's also a statistics done that suicide is most commonly happen at nighttime.
所以晚上独处的时候，夜尽人生的时候，大卫说我们要更小心，要谨慎。
And especially when we are alone at night, alone with our thoughts, the Bible or David in the Bible teaches us that is the time where we also need to be the most careful.
那刚才你看那个摩西说你的日子如何，你力量也何，那个日子是指什么意思？
So when Moses says, "As your days, so shall your strength be," what are these days mean?
这你每天生活所造成的所形成一种累积这个习惯。
So the days referring to the accumulative habits that we have gathered over a period of time.
然后习惯慢慢养成，就会成为你的个性。
And when all these accumulated habits habitualize, then it becomes part of our character.
真的要养成一个好的习惯，坦白讲不是很容易的。
And we can understand it is difficult to build up a good habit.
我个人就是我也承认我不是我意志力不是我不是一个意志力很坚强的人。
And I must admit that myself, I'm not someone who has a very strong determination.
比如说我一直很想要立志，我要把这个英文圣经读过一遍。
For example, I once made a resolution that I wanted to read through the English Bible once throughout.
当然因为中文圣经对我来讲，我读了好几遍，这个是应该的，因为我是传道，本来就应该多读几遍了。
So for the Chinese Bible, I have already read through it multiple times, and that's natural and also expected because my profession is a preacher.
但是英文我很想这样做，可是常常都没有接续下去。
And in the case for English Bible, many times I have the willingness to do it, but I'm unable to do so.
你知道后来你知道那个手机有一个 app， 它的 我不知道这个英文它是用什么名字，它的中文是习惯哈，它的那个 app 的名字就是习惯。
So there's a particular app on the mobile phone, and I'm not sure what the equivalent is in English, but it's a Chinese app, and it's called Habit.
啊，那或是那个 custom 是不是？好，好，那这个软体，它就说你每天，它会记录你每天做，然后你没有做，它可以帮你统计，它会帮你统计啊。哈。
So habits or customs. So this particular software, what it does, it will records the actions that you do every day, and then over a period of time, it will give you a statistics.
它好像一个时钟一样，就是你开始做的时候，会慢慢的转，等到你真的这个习惯养成，它就这个就是变成一个完整的语言呐，完整的语言。
So it will give you a diagram representation that the more frequency you do this particular action, they will start to draw a picture of a clock. So the more you do it, then it would extend the clock, and eventually it becomes a full circle.
那我发现啊，我常常断掉我的那个习惯，都是在礼拜六。
And then I noticed there was a pattern where I struggled to maintain my habit, and that usually happens on a Saturday.
想说啊，礼拜六我今天要领会哦，很忙。好啦，这个今天就暂时不要读经了。
And so I realized that because on the Sabbath day is where I'm especially busy, having needed to conduct a lot of services. So I tend to then put this habit aside on this day.
啊，你只要有一个借口，那你接下来你什么借口都出现了。
And I find that once you start to have an excuse not to do this particular habit, then after that it's easier to make other excuses to avoid this habit.
后来我想想呢，如果譬如说，假设我每天是读15分钟到20分钟，譬如说了哈。
So for example, if every day I was meant to read the English Bible for about 15 to 20 minutes.
一边读一边听嘛，哈，一边读一边听。现在 app 蛮不错，都会有人念给你听这样。
And so I would read and also listen to how it was read from the app.
好，但是到礼拜六因为很忙嘛，所以我还是就说5分钟就好了，没关系，至少我还是要做这样的。
And when it comes to Saturday, what I tried to change was that even though it's busy a day for me, I would still do the same thing, but I would do it for 5 minutes.
那这样之后呢，那我就发现这个习惯就可以连起来，就不会断掉了哈。
And when I made this small adjustment, then I find that I would then be able to continue on with my habit and not stop.
好，那我想每个人的做事方式啊，哈。
And of course, everyone would have their own ways to try to continue and enforce your habits.
有些人他意志力很坚强，就不需要像我这样子了哈。
And some people will have very strong resolution, then they don't need to go down the path that I took.
那我是只要强调说，你要培养一个这种好的习惯，坦白讲是不是很容易的哈。
But my point is that in order to build up a very, very good habit, it's actually quite a difficult thing to do.
但是你如果愿意做的话，真的很不错哈。
But as long as we are willing to take the first step to do this, then it's actually quite a good start.
啊，那我觉得我还有一个最难就是那个运动，我真的很懒。
And the other thing I found quite difficult is to make myself exercise.
那我也是同样用这个方式哦。好了，刚开始培养习惯，运动个5分钟就好了，这样。
So I use the same method where at the start, and I would say, let's just do 5 minutes of exercise every day.
每天都一定要运动这件事情要做到哈。
So every day I must ensure that I at least do some kind of exercise.
当你那个习惯变得一个完整的圈的时候呢，你就可以把时间拉长，然后把品质弄好一点，这样。
And when you are able to continue this action and you are able to complete a full cycle, then you find that you can start to extend your time on this particular habit, and also there's some longevity in your habit.
好，那我们再看回来这个创世纪哈。
Coming back to Genesis
19章
49,
第21节。
verse 21. Genesis chapter 49, verse 21. Naphtali is a deer let loose. He uses beautiful words.
拿佛他利的意思是相争的意思。
The meaning of Naphtali is wrestling.
这是拉结的使女毕拉的第二个儿子。
So he is the second son of Rachel's maid Bilhah.
你看到当这个名字用象征的意思，你就知道这个拉结的那个心一直想要跟他姐姐一直相争嘛。
And therefore, when we look at the meaning of the name Naphtali, which means wrestling, this reflects the mindset of Rachel.
那这种会想要相争的人会先从他的语言讲话开始的。
And people who likes to wrestle or likes to be competitive with others, you've noticed that it starts with their speech first.
我相信大家有时候在公司里面会碰到一些人，哇，那个比较企图性比较强或者比较想要跟他争的，你看他那个语言都很犀利的
And so I'm sure that you would understand, you'll find that in your workplace, you would find people whose character is very ambitious and very competitive in nature, and you notice it from the way they speak.
那圣经这个以色列把它比喻说所谓被释放的母鹿，这什么意思
So when Jacob or Israel rather it describes Naphtali as a deer let loose, what does that mean?
这个都应该是指的他的这个灵活度很灵活了哈。
So it's describing his character is very flexible.
不只是他的个性，也包括他们征战，他们也很会征战这样哈。
Not just referring to his personality, but they're also in their military strategy.
好，我们看一下这个诗篇的第18篇的33节。
And let's turn to Psalms chapter 18.
对，33节。
Verse 33. Psalms chapter 18, verse 33. He makes my feet like the feet of deer and sets me on my high places.
34节。
34. He teaches my hands to make war so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze.
当然，这从字面上意思是指很会征战。
And so these two verses tells us that this person is very good at fighting warfare.
这个你可以把它解释到所谓的属灵的层面。
But you can also learn some life application in terms of our spiritual life.
我们讲说脚很快如母鹿的蹄，意思是说这个很灵活，就是我们在形容脚，代表说他平常的所走的路，行动上、行为上这样。
And here, this verse 33, describing my feet like the feet of deer, so that we know that in the Bible, when feet are used, it's often referring to their way of life.
蛮类似嘴述所讲的这个灵巧像蛇类似像这样子的概念
So it's similar to how Jesus described be wise as a serpent.
好，我们再看一下这个士师记。
Let's also refer to the book of Judges.
士师记的第4章。
Judges chapter 4.
第4章的第6节，就这边就表示，就这边就那个有一个士师叫底波拉哈。
Chapter 4, verse 6 describes a judge called Deborah.
那他就把一个将军的一个人名叫巴拉他就是这个拿弗他利的人。
So here also mentions a character called Barak, and who is from the tribe of Naphtali.
那16节呢，你会发现哇，这个巴拉他追赶这些这个敌人非常迅速
And if we read verse 16 onwards, we see that Barak pursued the enemies very quickly and swiftly.
好，我们再看一下第5章的第18节。
Let's continue to read chapter 5, verse 18.
这后面说到说，拿弗他利人在田野的高处也是如此
The second part of this verse 18, Naphtali on the heights of battlefield.
等于说他在打仗的时候，他会很容易，因为他的脚很灵活所以可以爬到那个高处去打仗这样。
And because he's very quick with his feet, and therefore in times of warfare, he would climb onto the higher place.
不管是从征战上的，或者从他的行动上的，是谈到这个拿弗他利这个人或这个支派，他们都比较灵活
And so whether it be from the perspective of their character or a perspective of fighting warfare, describes Naphtali as someone that is very quick thinking.
因为你要相争，你一定要灵活，你才能得胜嘛。
And in wrestling, you need to be very flexible and very quick, and therefore you can win the battle.
但是圣经这么讲，我们看一下这个创世纪第49章哈。
But we come back to the description in Genesis chapter 49, verse 21.
21节说他出佳美的言语啊。
It also describes that he uses beautiful words.
我觉得坦白讲，我蛮喜欢这句话的哈。
And for me, I quite like this phrase.
他的个性应该是有竞争性的，可能也不只是只有行动，包括他的言语啊。
And so Naphtali is meant to be a character that is very ambitious and lively, not just in his personality, but I believe also in his words.
从他的名字上就出来，都很清楚嘛，相争，对不对？就是他的宿命，对不对？哈。
And this reflects in the meaning of his name of wrestling.
所以说，但是他却能够战胜他的这种性格，在他讲话当中却没有表现出相争的话语。
However, he was able to overcome this meaning of his name of wrestling, and therefore his words that comes out of him is not words that is very combative in nature.
好，那这就是一个值得我们学习的地方。
So this is something that we can learn from him.
那他是一种被释放的母鹿哈，哇，跑得很快很快，跑得很快很快哈。
And even though he is like a deer that is let loose and he quickly runs off.
会相争哈。
And he would go off and do wrestling.
会打仗哈。
Fighting warfare.
动也非常迅速哈。
Very quick in his actions.
但是他却没有用这样子的性格来表现在他言语上，影响到下一代。
But he does not let this kind of personality influence the words that comes out of his mouth so that it would affect his future generation.
那所以在这个生命记第33章的地方哈。
And therefore we see in Deuteronomy chapter 33.
到23节这边就充满了这个祝福了。
In chapter 33, verse 23 is filled with words of blessings for Naphtali.
你说满得耶和华的福，可以得到西方跟东方为业。
And here it says he's full of blessings of the Lord. He possessed the west and the south.
那这个得的福是指什么福呢？
So what are these blessings of the Lord?
应该不只是指地面上的福气。
It is not just referring to earthly blessings.
我在星期六上午的时候，跟大家也在谈，就是说它是一种有预言性的福气啊。
On Saturday morning, I've already mentioned that these prophecies, these words, has a prophetic effects.
这个因为时间上要花一点时间，所以我今天就暂时先不说。
Because it needs some time to explain, so I will not elaborate on it tonight.
所以说星期六早上我就会谈这句话什么意思，然后再继续最后把这个拉结的2个孩子哈，就是约瑟跟便雅悯跟大家做个分享。
So I will elaborate more about these prophetic nature and these blessings on this coming Sabbath morning service, and then I will also run through Rachel's 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin.